Chapter 1. The Reluctant Assignment. Captain Elias Morgan had tackled his fair share of challenging missions as a soldier in the Alliance forces, but this assignment was different. His orders were clear yet baffling. Escort Lyra Salrek, the daughter of a high-ranking diplomat from the Zorathian consulate, back to her home world. Lyra wasn't just any diplomatic ward, though. She was a figure notorious for her open disdain for humanity. The last human escort assigned to her had been dismissed after a few days, unable to withstand her icy attitude and biting remarks. Elias, however, had a reputation for handling even the most difficult personalities, and he resolved to endure whatever challenges Lyra might throw his way. Their first encounter was set in the docking bay of the Vanguard, the Alliance's sleek interstellar vessel designed for diplomatic missions. Elias waited with military precision, hands behind his back, as the airlock doors hissed open. Lyra entered, her tall frame and imposing presence immediately commanding the room. Her emerald skin shimmered in the dim lighting of the bay, and her silver eyes fixed on him with an intensity that was both mesmerizing and unsettling. She was dressed in traditional Zorathian robes, their intricate patterns hinting at her elite status. Lyra's gaze swept over Elias, and he could feel her distaste even before she spoke. "So they sent a human to be my guard?" Her voice was smooth yet laced with unmistakable disdain. Elias kept his expression neutral, offering a respectful nod. "Captain Elias Morgan, at your service, ma'am. I've been assigned as your escort." She barely acknowledged his words, her attention shifting immediately to a datapad in her hand. The cold dismissal wasn't unexpected, yet it still stung. Elias reminded himself that he'd dealt with difficult individuals before and resolved to maintain his professionalism no matter what. The Vanguard launched into hyperspace soon after, and the mission officially began. The ship's quiet hum filled the corridors as they settled into the journey. Elias assumed that once underway, they would maintain a respectful distance from each other. Lyra seemed content to keep to her quarters, a fact for which he was grateful. He occupied himself with navigation checks, ship diagnostics, and the routine tasks that came with interstellar travel. But on the second night, his solitude was interrupted by the ship's comm system. Lyra's voice crackled over the line, sharp and imperious. "Captain Morgan, I need you in my quarters. Immediately." Elias sighed, mentally bracing himself before heading to her quarters. When the door slid open, he was greeted by a wave of intense heat. The climate control in Lyra's room had malfunctioned, raising the temperature to levels that were clearly comfortable for a Zorathian but unbearable for a human. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead almost instantly. Lyra was seated on a reclining chair, unaffected by the heat, looking at him with a hint of amusement. "Is something wrong, Captain? You look uncomfortable." He gritted his teeth, forcing a calm tone. "I'll take care of it, ma'am." The control panel was in the far corner of her room, and as he made his way over, he could feel her gaze on him, watching him with a strange mix of curiosity and irritation. He adjusted the settings, and within moments, the temperature began to stabilize. The cool air was a welcome relief, but Elias maintained his stoic expression. "Anything else, ma'am?" he asked, hoping to make his exit. She waved a hand dismissively, already returning her attention to her datapad. "No, you're dismissed." Elias left without another word, retreating to the safety of his quarters. He could feel his patience wearing thin, but he reminded himself that this was temporary. Just a few more weeks until they reached Zorith, and he could part ways with Lyra for good. Yet, as the days passed, their exchanges grew no warmer. Every interaction was steeped in subtle jabs and thinly veiled disdain. She questioned his every decision, mocked human customs, and reminded him that he was beneath her in rank, status, and species. Elias forced himself to stay calm, silently counting down the days until the journey would end. However, something deeper simmered beneath their cold interactions, something Elias couldn't quite define. Despite her open hostility, he sensed there was more to Lyra's behavior than simple prejudice. He found himself studying her when she wasn't looking, searching her expressions for any hint of vulnerability. But each time their eyes met, she would narrow her gaze, as if daring him to defy her. Still, Elias was determined to finish his assignment with professionalism. He avoided engaging with her beyond what was necessary, hoping that their silent animosity would pass with time. But he had underestimated how unpredictable space could be and how quickly his mission would take a turn neither of them could anticipate. Little did Elias know, this journey would bring them closer than either could imagine, and that the icy disdain between them would eventually thaw under the pressure of an unforeseen crisis. For now, though, he was content to keep his distance, unaware of how much he would come to rely on the very alien who seemed to despise him the most. Chapter 2. An Unexpected Crisis. The days continued in strained silence. Elias and Lyra barely spoke, their exchanges limited to the formalities of their arrangement. Lyra kept to herself in her quarters, leaving Elias to his duties on the bridge. He fell into a routine, checking ship diagnostics, monitoring the Vanguard's course, and planning their arrival in neutral space near Zarathian borders, where an official delegation would take over. It was a straightforward mission, one that Elias counted down to the end, but on the fourth day of their journey, something went wrong. The Vanguard was passing through a rarely traveled sector of space, known for its precarious asteroid fields and unpredictable gravity wells. Elias had double-checked the ship's path, making sure they would skirt the edges of the danger zones. Yet, as he was running a final system check, the Vanguard's lights dimmed, and a low, rumbling alarm sounded, followed by a shudder that reverberated through the hull. The control panels on the bridge flickered as warning icons lit up. Elias's heart raced as he scanned the readouts, trying to pinpoint the issue. But before he could fully grasp what was happening, the engines cut off entirely, plunging the ship into an eerie silence. They were dead in space. "Captain Morgan, what's going on?" Lyra's voice echoed through the ship's comm system, sounding sharper and more anxious than Elias had ever heard her. "Hang tight. I'm on it," he replied, keeping his tone steady. He tapped into the diagnostics, searching for answers. A spike in gravitational flux readings indicated that they'd been caught in a rogue gravity well, an anomaly that had destabilized the ship's power core and thrown their systems into disarray. With no propulsion, they were drifting, and without immediate repairs, they'd be stranded. As Elias initiated emergency protocols, he felt a presence behind him. He turned to find Lyra standing at the entrance to the bridge, her cool demeanor cracking with a hint of unease. She crossed her arms, glancing at the darkened control panels. "Is there a problem, Captain?" she asked, attempting to mask her worry with her usual indifference. "Yes, ma'am," he replied bluntly. "We've encountered an unexpected gravitational field that knocked out our main engines. I'll need to restart the power core manually from engineering." Lyra's frown deepened. "Can you fix it alone?" Elias's jaw tightened. "I can manage. But it would be faster if someone helped monitor the systems from the bridge while I handle the core." For a moment, he expected her to snap back, to question his capabilities or accuse him of incompetence. But instead, she surprised him. "Tell me what to do." Elias blinked, caught off guard. He gave her a quick nod, then pointed to the controls. "Just watch these panels here. If any of them turn red, let me know immediately." Without waiting for her response, he dashed to the engineering deck. The ship's corridors were lit only by emergency lights, casting an eerie glow as he made his way to the core. The air was thick with tension as he reached the massive, cylindrical engine housing at the center of the ship. Accessing the manual controls, he began the delicate process of rebooting the core. Back on the bridge, Lyra stared at the control panels, her usual confidence replaced by an intense focus. Her hands hovered over the console as she monitored the readings, her silver eyes scanning for any signs of trouble. Minutes passed in silence, punctuated only by the soft hum of emergency systems and the occasional static from the comlink. "Captain," her voice came through, tinged with an unfamiliar urgency. "One of the panels just turned red. Is that bad?" Elias's hands flew over the controls as he recalibrated the core. "It means there's a surge building up. I'm almost done here, just keep an eye on the stabilizers." "Understood," she replied, her voice steadier now. It was the first time he'd heard her speak without a hint of disdain, and he found it strangely reassuring. A few tense moments later, Elias completed the core reboot, and the ship's systems hummed back to life. He exhaled, relief flooding him as the lights brightened, and the steady thrum of the engines returned. He tapped his comlink. "We're back online." "Nice work up there," he said, an unexpected note of gratitude in his voice. When Elias returned to the bridge, he found Lyra still at the console, her gaze distant as she watched the stars through the viewport. She didn't acknowledge his arrival at first, but there was something softer in her expression, a hint of vulnerability that caught him off guard. "Thank you, Lyra," he said quietly. "You handled yourself well." Her gaze shifted to him, her eyes narrowing. "I didn't do it for you, Captain. I only helped because I have no intention of dying on this pathetic ship." The hostility was back, but Elias could tell it was a defense mechanism, a shield against whatever unease she might have felt during the crisis. He simply nodded, choosing not to press further. But as the Vanguard resumed its course, something unspoken lingered between them. They both knew that their hostility had been tested, and for a brief moment, they had relied on each other in a way that neither had expected. Elias returned to his duties, hoping the tension would fade with time. Yet, even as they settled back into their routines, he found himself thinking of that moment on the bridge, of the unguarded look in Lyra's eyes. He sensed that the journey had changed, though he couldn't quite say how. Chapter 3. Bonds Forged in Adversity. The days following their unexpected brush with the gravity well were strangely quiet. Elias and Lyra had slipped into a more respectful silence, the animosity between them softened by the memory of their crisis. Elias still handled the ship's controls and maintenance, while Lyra kept to herself, but the tension had shifted. They didn't speak of it, yet both seemed aware that something between them had changed. As they neared the boundaries of Zarathian space, Elias caught himself thinking back to those intense moments in engineering. He remembered the way Lyra's voice had lost its usual sharpness, her eyes reflecting a flicker of uncertainty. For a brief time, she had relied on him, and he had protected her, however reluctantly. Though she'd resumed her cold demeanor since, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than the mask of haughty indifference she wore. But any thoughts of camaraderie vanished abruptly when the Vanguard's alarms blared, pulling Elias back to the present. Red lights flashed on the control panels, signaling the presence of another vessel. He quickly scanned the readings, his expression growing grim. It was a pirate ship, an older model, heavily modified with illegal tech, and gaining on them fast. A knot formed in his stomach as he realized their predicament. They were still too far from Zorith to call for help, and the ship wasn't built for combat. Pirates in these sectors were ruthless, and they wouldn't hesitate to exploit a diplomatic vessel. "Captain Morgan, what's happening?" Lyra's voice startled him. She'd appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of alarm and frustration. "We're being pursued by pirates," he replied, his voice steady as he calculated their options. "They're closing in fast, and we're not equipped to outrun or outgun them in this sector." Lyra's jaw clenched, her silver eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and determination. "What do we do? You don't expect us to surrender to those savages, do you?" Elias looked at her, taken aback by the fire in her voice. Despite her usual aloofness, she wasn't willing to give up without a fight. He couldn't help but feel a surge of respect for her resolve. "We won't surrender," he replied, a steely determination in his tone. "But fighting them head-on isn't an option either. We'll need to outmaneuver them. Use the asteroid field up ahead as cover." Lyra glanced at the navigation screen, her expression skeptical. "And you think we can pull that off?" "Trust me," he said, meeting her gaze with unwavering confidence. "Just follow my lead." The asteroid field loomed ahead, a chaotic stretch of rocks and debris that had become a notorious hiding spot for outlaws and smugglers. It was a risky maneuver, but it was their best chance. Elias quickly adjusted the ship's trajectory, his hands steady as he guided the Vanguard into the asteroid belt. The ship shuddered as it entered the field, the proximity alarms blaring as they navigated the narrow paths between the massive rocks. Behind them, the pirate ship followed, but its bulkier design struggled with the tight turns. Elias saw an opportunity and took it, pushing the Vanguard through a tight pass, the edges of the asteroid scraping against the shields. "Hold on," he called out to Lyra, who had braced herself against the control console. She gritted her teeth, her eyes focused as she watched him navigate, her previous disdain replaced by something closer to respect. The pirate ship attempted to follow, but a miscalculated turn sent it scraping along the edge of an asteroid, tearing through its shields. Seizing the opportunity, Elias activated the ship's limited weaponry, aiming a blast at the weakened section of the pirate ship's hull. The shot connected, causing a small explosion that sent the pirate ship spiraling out of control. For a tense moment, both vessels drifted in silence, the pirates struggling to regain control as the Vanguard made its escape. Elias allowed himself a breath of relief, glancing over at Lyra. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of relief and surprise. You did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias gave a slight nod, his face flushed with the adrenaline of the narrow escape. "Looks like we make a good team after all." Lyra's gaze softened, and for the first time, her usual mask of superiority seemed to slip. She looked at him with something that felt almost like gratitude. "Perhaps I misjudged you, Captain." He raised an eyebrow, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That's the closest thing to a compliment I think I've heard from you." She rolled her eyes, but he could see a hint of a smile breaking through her usual stern expression. "Don't let it go to your head, human." They shared a brief, unexpected laugh, the tension between them easing in a way that felt natural for the first time since their journey began. In that moment, Elias saw a side of Lyra he hadn't imagined, one that was fierce, resilient, and even vulnerable beneath her layers of pride. The silence returned, but it was no longer uncomfortable. They sat together on the bridge, watching as the asteroid field faded behind them, the stars stretching out in a vast expanse of quiet beauty. The distance to Zorith was shrinking, and with it, the time they had left in each other's company. As they continued their journey, Elias found himself wondering what would become of their strange alliance once they arrived. For now, he was content to savor the rare, peaceful camaraderie they had found, two unlikely allies, bound by fate and shared trials. Chapter 4. Fate's Design. The days after their escape from the pirates brought an unusual calm between Elias and Lyra. Their silent partnership had evolved, an unspoken understanding forming between them. Lyra no longer treated him with disdain. Instead, she observed him with a quiet respect that had once been unthinkable. Likewise, Elias saw her not just as the aloof alien noble, but as someone who shared his resilience, courage, and, in some ways, loneliness. The final stretch of their journey lay before them, and the proximity to Zorith marked the end of their unlikely alliance. Soon, Lyra would be surrounded by her people, her responsibilities, her life beyond the Vanguard and the human escort she had once despised. But fate, as it would turn out, was not done with them yet. The silence of the ship was shattered when the alarms blared once again. This time, the reading showed something far more dangerous, a colossal gravitational anomaly looming directly in their path. Elias's heart pounded as he read the data. It was a wormhole, uncharted and unstable. The navigation system struggled to recalibrate, its maps unable to account for the anomaly's sudden appearance. Elias leaped into action, his hands flying over the controls as he tried to pull the Vanguard out of the wormhole's gravity. But it was too late. They were caught in its grip, their trajectory altered as the ship hurtled toward the anomaly. Lyra joined him on the bridge, her face pale as she grasped the gravity of the situation. "Can you steer us out?" she asked, her voice edged with desperation. "I'm trying, but the pull is too strong," Elias replied, his voice strained. He glanced at her, a rare vulnerability in his eyes. "Hold on to something. This is going to be rough." The Vanguard was dragged into the wormhole, the ship shuddering violently as it was pulled through the twisting vortex. Lights flickered, and the view outside the ship distorted into streaks of color and darkness, stretching and bending as the wormhole tossed them through the fabric of space. Elias clung to the controls, his knuckles white as he fought to keep the ship stable. Lyra stood beside him, her grip tight on the console, her silver eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. For a moment, he reached out, his hand brushing hers, an unspoken assurance passing between them. She looked up at him, her gaze steady, and nodded. Together, they held on as the ship lurched one final time before the wormhole spat them out into a new region of space. Silence fell over the Vanguard, broken only by the sound of Elias's labored breathing. He checked the instruments, his stomach sinking as he realized the implications of their new coordinates. They were far off course, thrown light years away from their intended path, into a sector of space that even the Alliance had not mapped. "We're in uncharted territory," Elias muttered, glancing at Lyra. It'll take days to recalibrate the navigation systems and determine where we are." Lyra looked out the viewport, her gaze distant. She was silent for a moment, taking in the endless expanse of stars, unfamiliar and cold. Then, to his surprise, she turned to him, her expression resolute. "We'll survive, Captain. Together." Elias felt a strange warmth at her words. This was no longer a forced partnership, nor was it a mere assignment. They were two beings, human and alien, stranded in the unknown, bound by their shared fate and newfound respect. As they worked together to stabilize the ship and chart a new course, Elias and Lyra found themselves talking in ways they never had before. She spoke of her homeworld, her duties, the burdens of being the diplomat's daughter, and the expectations that came with her title. Elias shared stories of his life in the Alliance, the battles he'd fought, the sacrifices he'd made. They laughed, exchanged banter, and found in each other a companionship neither had anticipated. In the quiet hours of the night cycle, Lyra confessed her reason for her coldness. Her family had long regarded humanity as a reckless and primitive species, believing that humans lacked the sophistication and control valued by the Zorathians. She'd inherited those prejudices, never questioning them until now. "You're different from what I expected," she admitted, her voice soft. "You're strong, yes, but there's kindness in you. You treated me with respect even when I didn't deserve it." Elias smiled, meeting her gaze. "And you're not what I expected either. Underneath all that pride, you're brave and compassionate, even if you don't want anyone to see it." She looked away, a faint blush coloring her emerald cheeks. For a moment, she seemed vulnerable, her usual defenses lowered. Elias felt a sudden urge to reach out, to bridge the gap between them, but he held back, respecting her silence. In the days that followed, their bond grew stronger, the unspoken feelings between them deepening. They navigated the unknown region together, facing new challenges and working as a team. And with each passing day, Elias felt his attachment to her grow, a feeling that went beyond duty or respect, something that he hadn't felt in a long time. Finally, the day came when they located a stable path back to Zorathian space. As the ship aligned with its new course, a bittersweet realization settled over them. Their journey was coming to an end, and soon they would part ways. On their final night aboard the Vanguard, Elias found Lyra on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. He approached her, his steps slow and hesitant. She looked up, her silver eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his heart skip. "Captain Morgan," she said softly, her voice holding a sadness he hadn't heard before. "When we return, things will go back to the way they were. You'll be a soldier of the Alliance, and I'll be the daughter of a diplomat, bound by the rules of my people." Elias nodded, his heart heavy. "I know, but it doesn't change what we've been through, or what we found out here." She hesitated, then took a step closer, her gaze never leaving his. "Perhaps one day, our paths will cross again. Perhaps in another time, in another place, we'll be more than just an assignment to each other." He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering. "I'd like that, Lyra." For a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath as they stood there, bound by the feelings they could not voice, the connection they had forged in the vastness of space. And though they knew it would end with the journey, neither regretted a moment of it. As the Vanguard docked at the Zorathian space station, Lyra turned to him one last time, her expression soft and vulnerable. "Goodbye, Captain Morgan. You've changed me, in ways I never thought possible." Elias watched her go, his heart full yet aching, knowing that their time together had left an indelible mark on both of them. As the docking doors closed and Lyra disappeared into the crowd, Elias felt a pang of loss, yet also a quiet hope. They were from different worlds, with different lives and different destinies. But somewhere, amid the endless stars, they had found a connection that transcended all barriers. And though fate had separated them, he knew their bond would endure, a quiet, eternal flame in the vastness of the universe.